Steno peeps, it's time for a new dictation. Today we're going to do some jury charge, and it's going to be centered around the Legally Blonde case that happened in the movie. So thought we'd make this fun. No particular speed. Let's get started. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you now have heard all the evidence in this case, and it is my duty to instruct you on the law that you must apply in your deliberations. This case is about the accusation that the defendant, Brooke Taylor, has committed murder. The prosecution claims that the defendant intentionally killed her husband, Hayworth Taylor, while the defense argues that the actions of the defendant were not criminal and were the result of self-defense, or at the very least, not premeditated. The burden of proving the defendant's guilt rests entirely with the prosecution. It is not the defendant's burden to prove her innocence. Rather, the defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If the prosecution has not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intentionally committed murder, you must return a verdict of not guilty. To find the defendant guilty of murder, the prosecution must prove each of the following elements beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant's intent. The prosecution must prove that Brooke Taylor intentionally caused the death of her husband, Hayworth Taylor, or acted with reckless disregard for his life. Causation. The prosecution must prove that the defendant's actions directly led to the death of the victim. If the prosecution claims the killing was premeditated, you must be satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant planned the killing before carrying out the act. However, you must also consider the defense's argument that the defendant was acting in self-defense or that she lacked the intent required for a conviction. If the defendant's actions were taken to protect herself from immediate danger of harm, she may have acted in self-defense. If you believe that the defendant was in imminent fear for her life or that of others, and that her actions were reasonable under the circumstances, you may find her not guilty based on self-defense. While it is not necessary to establish a motive for the crime, you may consider whether the prosecution has shown any motive for the defendant's actions. You have heard various testimonies, including that of Elle Woods, the defendant's attorney, who has presented an alternative explanation for the events in question. While Elle Woods may have introduced unconventional or surprising evidence, you must judge the credibility and relevance of all the evidence presented. As you deliberate, you are reminded that the law does not require you to agree with every point made by the attorneys. You are simply asked to weigh the evidence, apply the law, and reach a fair and just verdict. You are to reach your verdict based on the evidence presented and the law I have just given you. If you find that the prosecution has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt, then you must return a verdict of guilty. If, however, you find that the prosecution has not met its burden, you must return a verdict of not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen, your duty is a solemn one, and I trust you will carry it out with the utmost care and attention to detail. As you deliberate, you must not be swayed by sympathy, prejudice, or public opinion. The law requires you to be guided solely by the evidence presented in court and the legal standards I have explained. Personal feelings about the defendant, her profession, appearance, or lifestyle, however unconventional, must not factor into your verdict. You may consider the credibility of witnesses, including whether their statements were consistent, whether they had any motive to lie, and whether their testimony was supported or contradicted by other evidence. In this case, The defense introduced expert testimony and pointed out inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline. You are entitled to weigh that evidence as you see fit. Finally, remember that your verdict must be unanimous. Every juror must agree. Take your time, respect each other's viewpoints, and do not hesitate to review the evidence again if needed. You may now retire to the jury room to begin your deliberations. All right, easy peasy. That's a wrap. If you need more practice on jury charge, definitely head to that playlist, and I'll catch you on the next dictation.